He wasn't the kind of man you'd lock your doors against. In fact, he was the one who fixed your locks when they broke. For 30 years, Arthur Voss was the neighbor everyone trusted, the man who watched your kids, fed your pets, and never missed his prayers. But behind the smile, behind the calm voice and tidy home, something else was waiting. Something patient. Something cruel, and by the time anyone saw it, it was far too late. This is the story of how a small town's most trusted man became its greatest nightmare. Welcome to Crime Lens, where we don't just tell stories, we uncover them. Every week, we dive deep into the minds behind real crimes, the faces that smiled in public and hid monsters in private. If you're ready to see the world through the eyes of the investigators, the survivors, and sometimes the killers themselves, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's darker. It's real. And today, you're about to get the shock of your life. He wasn't the kind of man you'd ever suspect. Arthur Voss, 64 years old, polite, punctual, a face that made you feel safe before he even spoke. He was the man who waved every morning from his perfectly trimmed lawn, who knew everyone's name and who never, not once, raised his voice in public. In the quiet town of Briarwood, Arthur wasn't just another neighbor. He was the neighbor. The kind who showed up when your fence blew over, who offered to watch your pets when you were out of town. He volunteered at the library on Thursdays, coached Little League on weekends, and every religious celebrations, his house lit up brighter than anyone else's. To the community, Arthur was a treasure, dependable, trustworthy, even gentle. To the people who really knew him, though, there was something else. Not wrong exactly. Just off. He smiled too easily. Paused a little too long in conversation. He looked at people the way some men look at puzzles. Not with curiosity but calculation. Arthur was born right there in Briarwood in 1959. Only child. His father, a quiet factory worker. His mother, a church secretary. People remembered the Voss family as simple and devout. But behind closed doors, neighbors said you could sometimes hear shouting late at night, the kind that stopped suddenly as if someone realized they were being listened to. Arthur never mentioned his childhood much. In fact, he avoided talking about it altogether. Teachers said he was unusually mature, polite, well-spoken, but emotionally distant. While other boys roughhoused or played ball, Arthur spent lunch breaks alone, sitting under the old elm tree watching. He wasn't a bully. He wasn't bullied either. He was just separate. A quiet observer in a world full of noise. When his father died suddenly in a machinery accident, Arthur was only 16. He dropped out of sports, skipped social events, and started spending most of his time at home caring for his mother. Everyone in Briarwood praised him for his devotion. But a few neighbors would later recall how she seemed to fade quickly after that. Frail, quiet, always behind closed curtains. When she passed, Arthur stayed in that same house. Alone. For years. After her death, Arthur got a job as a maintenance supervisor at the Briarwood Community Center. A role that came with trust, keys, and access. He had a way with people. A calm, reassuring tone that made you want to hand over your worries. Parents thanked him for looking after their kids. Teenagers joked that he was too nice to ever get mad. And in that trust, Arthur found something he'd never had before: control. Psychologists later called it predatory familiarity. The ability to blend seamlessly into a moral community so deeply that no one ever questions your presence. Arthur was a master at it. Every act of kindness, every small favor, every polite nod, all of it reinforced the illusion. He wasn't just hiding. He was performing. And he'd been rehearsing his role for decades. There were moments, though, quiet cracks in the mask. A girl once told her mother she didn't like the way Mr. Voss stared at her during choir. Another said she caught him watching the playground from his car. But in Briarwood, where people trusted too easily and questioned too little, those whispers vanished before they could echo. And Arthur kept smiling. Kept waving. Kept being exactly who everyone needed him to be. In a town that worshipped kindness, Arthur Voss learned how to weaponize it. Before she became a headline, before her name was whispered in courtrooms and crime forums, Maya Thompson was just living. She was 23, a spark in human form. Friends said she could walk into a room and make it feel brighter, even if she was having a bad day. She wasn't famous, not rich, not remarkable in the way society keeps score, but she had direction. A recent graduate in social work, Maya had a heart too big for her own good. She volunteered at shelters, mentored local teens, and always carried a notebook filled with sketches and ideas. Little reminders that someday she'd open her own community center for kids who had nowhere else to go. She grew up in the same town Arthur called home, Briarwood. A small place where everyone knew each other's routines, where gossip moved faster than wind, and where Maya's family, the Thompsons, had lived for generations. Her parents were school teachers, both gentle souls who raised her to believe the best in people. And for most of her life that belief had worked. Her friends described her as the fixer. When someone's relationship fell apart, Maya showed up with coffee. When her roommate lost a job, Maya covered rent. She had that rare kind of empathy that made people open up, even strangers. It was that same compassion that led her to volunteer at the Briarwood Community Center, the same place Arthur Voss worked. At first their paths barely crossed. Arthur was the maintenance supervisor, polite, older, always helpful. He'd fix a door hinge, replace a light bulb, or quietly sweep the hallways while the staff wrapped up their evening programs. Maya would greet him like everyone else did, "Thanks, Mr. Voss." And he'd smile, that familiar, practiced smile. No one thought anything of it. But something about Maya caught his attention. She wasn't like the others. She looked people in the eyes, spoke softly, never rushed her words. In his decades of blending in, of learning how to be invisible, Arthur had developed a sixth sense for vulnerability, not weakness but openness. And Maya's openness drew him in like a moth to a flame. Her co-workers later recalled that Arthur began helping her more than anyone else. If she stayed late, he'd offer to walk her to her car. If she was carrying boxes, he'd insist on taking them. It seemed harmless, almost sweet. And in a world where kindness was becoming rare, Maya was the type who never doubted it when she saw it. But beneath that calm politeness, something darker was stirring. Arthur began learning her routine, the days she volunteered, the routes she took home, the names of her friends. He even started showing up at places she frequented, coincidentally, he'd say. A coffee shop here. A farmer's market there. It was never overt. Just familiar. And Maya, ever trusting, never questioned it. Why would she? He was a respected man in the community, twice her age, quiet, fatherly even. To her, Arthur Voss was safe. But to him, Maya was becoming an obsession, the embodiment of everything he could never control, never own, but desperately wanted to. The irony is cruel. The same empathy that made Maya extraordinary was what made her vulnerable. She saw good in everyone, even in the eyes that were studying her a little too closely. The last entry in her journal, found later by investigators, read, "I feel like I'm finally doing something that matters. The world is full of broken people. Maybe if we all just showed a little more kindness, it wouldn't hurt so much to live in it." Those were her words, the last trace of her innocence before kindness became the very thing that killed her. In the story of Arthur Voss, Maya wasn't just a victim. She was a mirror, reflecting everything human in a man who'd long forgotten what that meant. It was a Friday night, April 12, 2023. Rain had been falling since evening, turning Briarwood's quiet streets into silver ribbons that shimmered under the glow of streetlights. Maya was the last to leave the community center that night. The others had gone home hours earlier, promising to text her when they got in. She waved them off, saying she just wanted to finish one more report, always thorough, always responsible. At 8:47 p.m. she texted her roommate, "Almost done. Be home soon." That was the last message anyone would ever receive from her. Arthur Voss was there too. At least, that's what the building's maintenance logs later confirmed. He'd signed in earlier that evening under the pretense of fixing a faulty water heater in the basement. No one thought much of it. Arthur often worked late and everyone trusted him with keys to the entire building. Security footage, grainy, poorly lit, showed Maya locking up around 9:10 p.m. She wore a long gray coat, hair tied back, phone in hand. Then, in the reflection of the lobby's glass door, another figure appeared just for a second, tall, still, watching. Arthur. No one knows exactly what was said in that moment, but neighbors later recalled hearing faint voices outside, a man and a woman, followed by a car door shutting. Then silence. At 9:32 p.m., a motion sensor camera near the center's back lot picked up a car pulling out slowly, Arthur's old blue sedan. Inside, police would later find traces of mud on the passenger side floor and strands of long brown hair tangled in the seatbelt. Maya never made it home. By 11 p.m., her roommate Lily began to worry. She sent another text, "You good?" Then another. And another. No response. At 1:12 a.m. Lily tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Her heart started to pound, the kind of dread you can't explain but instantly feel. She checked social media. Maya hadn't been active in hours, which was unusual. By 3 a.m. she called the police. The responding officer almost didn't file it as missing. Probably crashed somewhere or stayed with a friend, he said. It was a small town, People didn't just vanish. But something about the roommate's panic made him take it seriously. When detectives reviewed the center's footage the next morning, Arthur's name was the first thing they noticed. He hadn't signed out. And when they tried calling him, his phone was off. In cases like this, time is everything. But Arthur knew that. He was patient, methodical. Every move he made was calculated to buy himself hours, maybe even days. Police went to his house at 10 a.m. The blinds were drawn. His car was gone. But his porch light, always on, always inviting, had been turned off for the first time in years. Inside, everything looked ordinary. A pot on the stove. Dishes drying in the rack. But in the basement, tucked beneath an old tarp, was a roll of duct tape, a torn piece of gray fabric and a single silver earring. Maya's earring. The rain that night washed away most of the physical evidence. But it couldn't wash away the sense that everyone in Briarwood felt the next morning, that their picture-perfect town had just lost something more than a girl. It had lost its innocence. And somewhere out there, under the same gray clouds that had swallowed the night before, Arthur Voss was already gone. They thought he'd run. But the truth was far worse. Arthur Voss wasn't escaping justice. He was preparing for what came next. The first call came in at 3:07 a.m. Lily Carson, Maya's roommate, her voice trembling, half crying, half pleading. She's not answering. She was supposed to be home by 9. This isn't like her. Please, something's wrong. Officer Daniels logged the call as a possible missing adult. In Briarwood, that phrase didn't mean much. People didn't just vanish there. They got lost, they forgot to charge their phones, they stayed overnight at friends' places. Small towns like Briarwood ran on trust. And that trust was often the reason they missed the first signs of danger. At 6:30 a.m., Lily showed up in person. She brought Maya's planner, her phone charger, and a list of all the places she might have gone. Her hands shook as she laid everything on the officer's desk. "You don't understand," she said. "She wouldn't disappear. She plans everything. She even sets alarms for watering her plants." Officer Daniels looked up, the weight of her words finally settling in. He called for a supervisor. And by 8:15 a.m., the Briarwood Police Department had officially opened the missing person investigation of Maya Thompson. Detective Marcus Blake was assigned to lead. He was a quiet man, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, methodical. He'd spent years studying criminal behavior, and something about this case unsettled him from the start. He'd seen disappearances before. Impulsive runaways, domestic disputes, lovers' quarrels, but this felt clean. Too clean. The first thing he noticed at Maya's apartment was how untouched everything felt. Her keys still on the counter. Her jacket hanging by the door. Her phone charger plugged into the wall, empty. It was as if she'd planned to come back. Then came the texts, dozens of unanswered messages from friends and family. The last one she'd sent, almost done. Be home soon. Gave Blake a starting point. The community center. Detectives canvassed the area. Nothing seemed out of place at first. No forced entry, no broken glass, no sign of struggle. But when Blake requested the security footage, something caught his attention immediately. At 9:10 p.m., Maya appeared, locking up. Calm, focused, looking at her phone. At 9:12 p.m., a shadow, tall, broad, wearing a dark jacket, moved across the far end of the hallway. No face. No sound. Just presence. Then the cameras went dark for 12 minutes. When the footage came back, the hallway was empty. No Maya. No shadow. It wasn't until the following afternoon that Arthur Voss's name entered the picture. Maintenance log, Arthur Voss, 6:30 p.m., water heater inspection. But there was no record of him signing out. And when police called his listed number, it went straight to voicemail. "This is Arthur. Leave a message after the beep." Detective Blake sent a patrol unit to Arthur's home. Everything looked normal at first glance. Front door locked. Curtains drawn. A faint smell of cleaning solution drifted from under the doorframe. When they finally entered, the house was spotless. Almost unnaturally so. No dust on the furniture. No dishes in the sink. Just a single mug on the counter, still damp, as if recently washed. Then in the basement, under an old tarp, they found it. Duct tape, a torn strip of gray fabric and a silver earring. The same design Maya's roommate described her wearing the night she disappeared. It wasn't panic cleaned. It was prepared. He'd planned this. By then the town was buzzing. Word spread fast, Arthur's missing too. Some refused to believe it. Not Arthur. Not the man who fixed their sprinklers and read stories at the library. Others said they'd always felt something off about him. Whispers of late-night drives. Strange looks. Moments when he lingered just a little too long. But no one could have imagined this. An anchorman broadcast it the following hours. Police in Briarwood are investigating the disappearance of 23-year-old Maya Thompson. Authorities have confirmed that community center employee Arthur Voss is also missing and may be connected to the case. In a small town, a man like Arthur doesn't just vanish without help. Every move he made was designed to blend in, to disappear in plain sight. We weren't just chasing a suspect, we were unraveling a performance. Days turned into a week. Maya's face was everywhere. Telephone polls, news reports, Facebook posts. Every lead felt promising until it wasn't. Every clue led to another dead end. But Detective Blake kept circling back to the same question. Why Maya? Why her? The answer, he later said, was buried in the pattern of his kindness. When a case refuses to rest, the evidence begins to whisper. Detective Kareem Blake had been in law enforcement for nearly 2 decades, but the disappearance of Maya Thompson had a grip he couldn't shake. The longer he stared at Arthur Voss's photograph, the calm eyes, the faint smile, the ordinary man, the more his instincts screamed that there was nothing ordinary about him. Arthur wasn't just missing. He'd vanished with intent. At first there was nothing concrete, just the oddities. A maintenance worker with no close family. No criminal record. No social media. No paper trail beyond routine employment forms. The kind of man who could live among you for years and still remain invisible. But Blake's gut told him that Arthur's invisibility was the crime. He started with the basics, Voss's work history. The records were sparse but tidy, too tidy. He'd worked in 3 different towns over the past 15 years, each time leaving quietly, each time following the same routine. A brief notice, no forwarding address, and no references. When Blake called one of the older employers, a retired school custodian named Harold Finn, the old man hesitated before speaking. Arthur? Oh yeah, I remember him. Quiet fella. Good worker. But there was something strange. One of the girls from the after-school program, she told me he used to wait in the hallway after his shift. Said it was because he liked the quiet. I told him it wasn't a good look. Week later he quit. Blake scribbled it down. His pulse quickened. The next step was surveillance. Every business within a mile of the Briarwood Community Center was checked. Dozens of cameras, hundreds of hours of footage. Most of it uneventful, people walking dogs, cars passing, rain pooling in gutters. But then, at exactly 9:06 p.m. on the night Maya disappeared, one camera caught a glimpse. A gray Ford Econoline van pulling out from behind the center's side entrance. The van had no plates. When Blake enhanced the footage, he caught a faint reflection in the windshield, Arthur's face lit by the glow of the dashboard. Expressionless. Focused. He was driving as if he'd done it before, Blake later said in his case notes. No panic. No hesitation. Just execution. The van was eventually located 2 towns away, abandoned behind a shuttered motel. Inside, investigators found faint traces of bleach and the smell of ammonia, but one mistake stood out. A single strand of long brown hair wedged in the seatbelt clasp. DNA confirmed what Blake already feared, it was Maya's. Forensic tests revealed something else, something that chilled the entire department. Under UV light, microscopic fibers matching Maya's jacket were found in the cargo area. And embedded in the texture of the floor mat, traces of soil consistent with the wooded outskirts of Briarwood Park. That was the first time we realized we weren't dealing with a single crime, the forensic expert explained. We were looking at a method. From there, Blake's investigation turned obsessive. He requested access to statewide missing person archives spanning the past 2 decades. Over 4,000 names. He filtered for geography, rural towns, same radius. Then by circumstance, women aged 18 to 25, vanished at night, no forced entry, no ransom. By dawn, 6 cases fit the same pattern. 6 young women. 6 small towns. 6 years apart. Each one had been last seen leaving a community space, a library, a youth center, a church hall. And in each town, one name surfaced quietly on the staff rosters, Arthur J. Voss. He's been doing this for years, Blake murmured. He picks small towns because no one ever thinks monsters live there. His partner frowned. But why move? Why wait years between victims? Blake stared at the map, at the distance between each town. Because he studies them. He plays the long game. And when the pattern starts to hum, he moves on before anyone connects the notes. As the investigation deepened, so did the portrait of Arthur Voss. Neighbors described him as polite, helpful, the kind of man who always waved. A woman from his church said he once fixed her car battery in the rain and refused payment. But another recalled something more unnerving, the way he'd compliment children on their good posture, or how his smile seemed too wide when they laughed. Blake's team began conducting background interviews, piecing together fragments that didn't seem significant until seen together. A cashier remembered Arthur buying large quantities of cleaning supplies late at night. A gas station attendant swore he saw Voss burning something behind his house one evening, said it smelled like rubber and metal. A teenage boy reported seeing him digging near the old quarry a few months back. Individually, these were nothing. But together they formed a silhouette of methodical cruelty. He wasn't impulsive, Blake wrote. He was ritualistic. Every act was practice for the next. Then came the break that turned suspicion into certainty. An analyst cross-referenced Arthur's employment with local power grid data. In each town where he'd worked, on the night of each disappearance, there had been a small, unexplained power outage, just long enough to disable a few cameras. The outages always occurred near his workplace. That was no coincidence. That was control. He wasn't reacting. He was choreographing. He learned the rhythm of each town, when the lights flicker, when the streets empty, when the silence swallows sound. That's when he moved. Armed with warrants, Blake's team raided a storage unit registered under a false name. Inside were rows of sealed boxes labeled only with dates. Each one contained personal items, purses, jewelry, clothing, all catalogued, cleaned, preserved. And at the bottom of the last box, a photograph of Maya, smiling at a community fundraiser. The timestamp read 2 weeks before her disappearance. Soft, haunting music rises. That was when the full truth became impossible to ignore. Arthur hadn't stumbled upon Maya. He'd selected her. He'd attended her events, fixed the lighting in her building, memorized her schedule. He'd studied her until she fit the mold of every victim before her. As the evidence piled up, Blake's exhaustion turned to obsession. He stopped sleeping, spending nights replaying security footage and old case files, tracing Arthur's shadow through every grainy frame. He started to see a pattern in the smallest gestures, how Arthur turned his wrist when he locked a door, how he lingered by reflective surfaces, always aware of the camera's gaze. He wasn't hiding from us, Blake later said. He was performing for us. He wanted someone to finally see the art in his horror. By the time federal investigators joined the case, one thing was certain. Arthur Voss was no longer just a missing maintenance worker. He was a predator who had turned small-town trust into a hunting ground. He was a ghost who used kindness as camouflage. And somewhere in the dense silence of Briarwood's forests, Blake believed that Ghost was still watching. Cut to final line, whispered narration over static police radio. He built a life on being the man no one looked twice at. And in that invisibility he found his power. Screen fades to black. Coming up next, the capture, how Detective Blake cornered the man no one thought existed. When the mask finally began to slip, Arthur Voss didn't run. He adapted. After months of surveillance, stakeouts, and sleepless nights, Detective Kareem Blake had a timeline. Every town, every victim, every lie stitched into a pattern that only one man could have woven. But catching Arthur wasn't about finding where he was. It was about understanding how he thought. Blake had spent weeks studying Arthur's patterns. The early morning drives, the same gas stations, the same grocery store visits. Arthur lived in a rented cabin outside of town, solitary, self-contained, hidden beneath the pretense of simplicity. But when the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit joined the case, they confirmed Blake's suspicion. Arthur's isolation wasn't about privacy. It was ritual. You don't catch a man like Arthur Voss with brute force. You catch him by crawling into his mind, the quiet corners, the routines, the comfort zones. Because for him, routine was safety. Predictability was control. He liked control over environment, the silence, the symmetry, the way objects never moved without his hand guiding them. If he felt watched, Blake recalled, he'd start shifting his schedule by exactly 9 minutes. It was like clockwork. That was our tell, the anxiety of a predator sensing the hunt turning on him. The tactical team set up 3 days before the planned arrest. Hidden cameras in the trees. Motion sensors along the gravel driveway. For 72 hours, Arthur did nothing unusual, ate alone, read by lamplight, walked the perimeter with a flashlight. But on the 4th night, something changed. He started burning papers in a steel drum behind his cabin. Soft music fades, replaced by crackling fire and distant thunder. Blake watched through a monitor, jaw tight. Arthur wasn't panicking, he was erasing. By the time the warrant was signed, every second mattered. At 2:17 a.m., A convoy of unmarked vehicles crept up the dirt road, headlights off, tires whispering against wet gravel. The agents moved like shadows, no words, just the rhythm of boots on mud. Inside the cabin, Arthur sat at his table, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the flickering light of a single lamp. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even flinch when the door burst open. He just looked at us, Blake said later. Like he'd been expecting it. When they cuffed him, Arthur smiled, faint, almost polite. "Detective Blake," he murmured as if greeting an old friend. "I was wondering how long it would take you." That single line sent a chill through the room. The footage later released during the trial showed Arthur sitting perfectly still, hands folded, expression unreadable. He spoke in measured tones, never defensive, never angry. When asked about Maya, he simply tilted his head. "Maya?" he said softly. "She was kind. What happened to her?" Blake pressed. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "She trusted me. That's what happens when people trust too much." For the next 6 hours, Blake tried everything: empathy, confrontation, silence. But Arthur answered questions with questions, deflecting, teasing, circling his own guilt like a vulture over its prey. "You keep looking for monsters," Arthur said, "but you never see the mirror. People like me exist because people like you believe we don't." It wasn't just defiance. It was philosophy. Arthur wanted Blake to understand him. Meanwhile, the evidence mounted. Forensics from the storage unit matched fibers found in the van. The soil on Arthur's boots matched the wooded area near Briarwood Park, the same place where search dogs had caught a faint scent weeks earlier. Then came the digital discovery: hidden drives in the cabin's floorboards. When analysts decrypted them, what they found silenced the entire room. Inside were photographs, not of Maya alone, but of all 6 missing women. Each photo catalogued, time-stamped, organized by date and location. Some images showed them laughing in public places. Others taken from a distance, through windows or reflections. Arthur had been documenting his victims long before he acted. He wasn't collecting memories. He was curating ownership. He saw them as art projects, Blake later told reporters. Each life was a piece in his private museum of control. The arrest made national news. Arthur Voss, the quiet janitor, the helpful neighbor, the trusted handyman, was revealed to be one of the most methodical serial predators in modern history. In court, he never pleaded insanity. He smiled when the prosecutor listed the charges: 6 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, multiple counts of abduction. When asked if he felt remorse, Arthur simply said, "I regret that I couldn't finish the 7th. Gasps filled the courtroom. Blake, sitting in the back, clenched his fists. That statement wasn't about arrogance. It was invitation. Even in chains, Arthur was still playing his game. Months later, Blake would admit the case still haunted him. The faces on his board were gone, but the echoes remained. He'd see Arthur's calm expression in reflective surfaces, hear his voice in the stillness between radio static. "You think you're done," Blake said, "but people like him, they get in your head. You start questioning everything: who you trust, who's watching, who smiles too easily." Arthur Voss was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms without parole. But in the corners of the internet, his name refused to die. Forums dissected his behavior. Amateur sleuths glorified his intelligence. And somewhere between fascination and fear, the legend grew. "Evil doesn't end with an arrest," Blake said in the closing interview. "It adapts. Every time someone romanticizes a killer like him, Arthur wins again." Justice was served. But closure? That never came. Because behind Arthur's calm voice and polite manners lay the truth that terrified everyone who met him. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they hold the door open and smile. If you or someone you know is missing or in danger, contact your local authorities immediately. Speak up. Don't stay silent. When people picture a killer, they imagine rage, chaos, the loss of control. But Arthur Voss was the opposite. He was serenity weaponized. He didn't kill because of impulse. He killed because it made him feel whole. Arthur fits what we call a controlled narcissist with antisocial tendencies. He wasn't driven by bloodlust or pleasure. He was driven by order. Everything he did, from how he folded his shirts to how he arranged his victims, was about maintaining the illusion that he was in control of the world around him. Arthur's life was built on structure. He woke at the same hour, ate the same breakfast, spoke in the same measured tone. To his neighbors, he was reliable, the man who'd help fix your porch light or water your plants when you were away. He blended in because he studied people like blueprints. But beneath that politeness was something colder, an emptiness that craved validation. Not the kind that came from praise but from possession. For Arthur, empathy wasn't a feeling. It was a tool. A currency he spent to buy people's trust. And once he had it, he'd drain them of everything that made them human. Arthur didn't choose his victims because of who they were, the psychologist continued. He chose them because of how they made him feel, useful, admired, significant. Once that feeling faded, so did their worth. That's the paradox of men like Arthur Voss. They appear gentle because it protects the monster within. Experts reviewing his behavioral profile noticed patterns common among organized offenders. He planned meticulously. He left little physical evidence. And he viewed the investigation as part of the game. But what made him distinct wasn't his cunning, it was his philosophy. During interrogation he spoke calmly about morality, even empathy. He described humans as fragile ecosystems, creatures who mistake kindness for safety. Control is the purest form of love, he once told Detective Blake. When I control them, I protect them, from chaos, from themselves. It wasn't rage. It was ideology. Arthur genuinely believed he was bringing order to a broken world, one person at a time. That's what terrified me most, Blake said. He didn't sound insane. He sounded reasonable. Like he'd built an entire moral system around his crimes. And he believed it. Arthur's calmness became his armor. He rarely raised his voice, never acted impulsively. When faced with accusation he didn't deny, he redirected. He'd say things like, "You think I'm evil, but tell me, haven't you ever wanted to control someone? Even a little?" He forced people to confront their own darker thoughts, then used their discomfort as proof of his superiority. That's how he manipulated. Not by force, by reflection. Psychological breakdown, cinematic B-roll, still shots of mirrors, empty chairs, rain streaking down windows. The core of Arthur's pathology lay in narcissistic deprivation, the belief that the world owed him attention, but kept refusing to see his greatness. To him, taking a life wasn't destruction. It was proof that he existed. He once wrote in a hidden journal, "They remember the victims, yes, but they'll never forget the one who took them away. In death, I become eternal." That's the mark of a psychological sadist, someone who doesn't need pain to feel powerful. They just need silence, obedience, control. Arthur Voss wasn't the devil in disguise. He was the reflection of something painfully human, the hunger to matter, to dominate, to be seen. Most people bury that darkness. Arthur cultivated it. And that's what made him terrifying, not his crimes but his reason. When you understand men like Voss, Blake concluded, you start realizing the scariest thing about them isn't what they do, it's how much of them lives in all of us. Camera zooms slowly into Arthur's mugshot again. His faint smile lingers on screen. He didn't just manipulate people. He manipulated the very idea of evil. By the time the trial began, Arthur Voss was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of fear, deception, and the terrifying truth that monsters don't always hide in the dark. They hold doors open. They smile. They blend in. April 3, 2024, State of New Hampshire vs. Arthur Voss. 6 counts of first-degree murder. 1 count of aggravated kidnapping. And a courtroom packed with grief, rage, and morbid fascination. They came from every corner of the country. Journalists, true crime bloggers, families of the victims, and ordinary citizens who couldn't reconcile the image of the quiet handyman with the horrors now attached to his name. Every seat was filled. Every camera focused on one man. And when the bailiff called, "All rise," all eyes turned toward Arthur Voss. He walked in calmly, hands cuffed, posture straight. No emotion. No guilt. Just that faint, unreadable smile. Soft piano underscore fades in, reflective but chilling. It was the same expression he'd worn the day they arrested him, a quiet smirk that said he was still in control. But control, as Detective Blake knew too well, was the first thing the courtroom would strip away. "I remember thinking he looked smaller that day," Blake said later. Not physically, spiritually. Like the air around him had changed. The myth of Arthur Voss was gone. All that was left was a man who thought he could outsmart the world. The prosecution began with precision, methodical, unrelenting, mirroring Arthur's own style. They presented the evidence piece by piece. The digital drives. The timeline of the disappearances. The forensic ties between Arthur's home and the victims. But what hit hardest weren't the technicalities, it was the faces. Photographs of Maya, of Emily, of Jordan, their smiles frozen in happier times, now projected onto the courtroom wall. Each image followed by a pause long enough for the silence to hurt. Mothers cried. Journalists looked away. Even the judge took a long breath before allowing the trial to continue. Arthur never flinched. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the photos, not in remorse but as if studying art. The defendant wants you to believe he's a thinker. That he's rational. That he's different from other killers. But look at these faces. Tell me, what kind of logic turns love, trust, and kindness into reasons to destroy someone? She stepped closer to the jury box, holding a photo of Maya Thompson, the first victim. He didn't just kill them. He erased them. Because to Arthur Voss, control was God. And he played it well, until now. Defense segment. Arthur's lawyer tried to humanize him, painting him as a victim of trauma, citing childhood neglect, emotional repression, and possible dissociative behavior. He claimed Arthur didn't fully comprehend his actions, that his crimes were manifestations of a fractured mind. But the jury wasn't swayed. Because Arthur wasn't broken. He was aware. And he proved it every time he spoke. I knew what I was doing, Arthur said, voice steady. You all keep trying to make me sick, but I'm not. I'm the only one here who's honest about what he is. The jury shifted in their seats. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the defense attorney looked away. It wasn't the statement of a man seeking forgiveness. It was the manifesto of someone who believed his own myth. When the prosecutor confronted him directly, asking, "Do you regret killing them?" Arthur smiled faintly. "Regret," he said, "is just society's way of pretending morality exists." A wave of disgust rolled through the courtroom. Someone shouted, "Monster!" from the gallery before being removed. But Arthur remained calm, almost pleased, as though he'd successfully provoked the reaction he wanted. Blake's jaw clenched. He'd spent over a year living inside this man's head, deciphering his patterns, chasing his shadows, and now, seeing him perform for the crowd made something twist deep in his chest. He wanted the attention, Blake said later. He wanted to be remembered. But in that moment I realized something. He wasn't controlling the room anymore. The silence after his words, it wasn't fear. It was disgust. The jury took 14 hours to deliberate. During that time, Arthur remained in his holding cell, pacing in circles, whispering to himself. He wrote something in the palm of his hand, a phrase officers later found scrawled faintly in pen. Even truth is just perspective. It was the last attempt at control, to frame his downfall as a philosophical victory. When the judge returned, the atmosphere was electric. Every breath felt heavy. Every camera was locked on Arthur. The foreman stood. The courtroom fell silent. "On all counts," he said, voice trembling, "we find the defendant guilty." The words hit like thunder. A collective exhale filled the room. Some cried, some cheered, others simply sat stunned. Arthur didn't react. He blinked once, lips tightening just slightly. Then, for the first time since his arrest, his mask broke. A single twitch in his jaw, a flicker of something almost human. Fear. The judge's voice was clear and unwavering. "Arthur Voss, you are sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole." Applause broke out. Arthur didn't look up. He just whispered something under his breath, barely audible over the noise. Detective Blake, standing by the exit, heard it clearly. "They'll still remember my name." Blake leaned closer and said quietly, "They'll remember Maya's first." Arthur's eyes lifted, and for once he had no answer. The trial of Arthur Voss wasn't just about punishment. It was about exposure, the peeling away of charm, intellect, and pretense until all that remained was the truth. A man who mistook control for connection and logic for love. In the end, justice wasn't poetic. It was raw. It was the collective voice of a community saying, "We see you now." Camera pans out of the courtroom into daylight, symbolic rebirth. Arthur Voss built a life around the illusion that he could never be caught. But the truth always catches up, even to those who think they can rewrite it. Fade to black, gentle piano music swells. For Maya. For every voice that was silenced. When the gavel fell, the story of Arthur Voss didn't end. It echoed. Through homes, classrooms, newsrooms, through every quiet corner where trust had once lived. For months, the town carried the weight of what had happened. Headlines faded. Reporters moved on. But for those who had lived it, who had felt it, healing wasn't a single moment. It was a process. A slow return to believing in safety again. Inside, the Thompson family tried to rebuild a life that no longer felt complete. Her mother, Evelyn, still set a plate for Maya at dinner sometimes. Not out of denial, but remembrance. Her younger brother, Jacob, began volunteering with a local outreach group that helped victims of online exploitation. He said it made him feel closer to her. She always wanted to help people, he told a reporter quietly. So that's what we're doing now. The family started the Maya Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit that partnered with schools and parents to teach online safety and emotional awareness. It grew faster than anyone expected. And soon, what began as grief turned into purpose, a ripple of protection born from unimaginable pain. The community changed too. People greeted their neighbors again. Parents talked to their children more, not about fear but about trust. And for the first time in a long while, the town felt less haunted. But even with the healing, the shadow of Arthur Voss lingered. Not as a ghost, but as a lesson. Detective Blake retired 3 months after the trial. Officially, he said it was time. Privately, he admitted the case never really left him. There's a difference between solving a case, he said, and finding peace with it. He kept a photo of Maya on his desk, the one where she's smiling in the sunlight, hair blowing across her face. To him, it wasn't a reminder of tragedy. It was proof of why he did what he did. Blake began guest lecturing at local academies, teaching new recruits how to detect digital grooming, how to listen to victims before it's too late. He said he wanted to make sure the next Maya gets to grow old. In time, the town stopped being defined by the monster who walked among them. It became defined by the strength of those who refused to let him win. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. It's about taking the darkness that once consumed you and using it to light the way forward. Arthur Voss is gone, locked away where the echoes of his manipulation can't reach another soul. But the people he hurt? They're still here. Still standing. And in every life they touch, Maya lives on. When evil hides, it rarely looks like evil. It looks like a neighbor. A teacher. A man who smiles at the grocery store and waves across the street. Arthur Voss wasn't a monster in appearance. That's what made him dangerous. He was the reflection of something society still struggles to see. That darkness doesn't announce itself. It camouflages itself in kindness. People trusted him because trust is our default. It's what keeps the world moving, the belief that people are good until proven otherwise. But that same faith, unguarded and unquestioned, can become a weapon. And for Maya it did. Maya wasn't careless. She was human, hopeful, open-hearted, and too young to imagine what hid behind Arthur's calm, measured voice. That's what predators like him understand best. Not violence but access. They study our patterns, our weaknesses, our hunger for validation. And they offer it drop by drop until we mistake control for care. What happened to Maya wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was a mirror, reflecting every moment we ignore the subtle signs. The friend who becomes too possessive. The teacher who praises one student more than seems right. The neighbor whose charm masks discomfort that we can't quite name. We notice, but we don't want to believe. Because belief, that something sinister could exist within the familiar, means safety was never guaranteed. And that's a truth too heavy for most to hold. The hardest part isn't catching the criminal. It's realizing how long they were right in front of you. He said it quietly, almost to himself, the words of a man who's seen too much. Who knows that monsters don't come from dark forests anymore. They come from bright rooms, polite conversations, and social circles where suspicion feels impolite. There's a kind of blindness that comes from decency. A refusal to see evil because we don't want to think it could touch us. But that's the paradox of empathy. It can save us or destroy us. And in Arthur's world, empathy was the perfect disguise. He weaponized people's belief in his goodness, the same way a magician uses misdirection. While everyone watched the hand that smiled, no one saw the one that took away innocence behind the curtain. The verdict brought closure, yes. But closure is not the same as peace. Peace comes only when the lesson is absorbed. When society stops treating predators as exceptions, and starts acknowledging how systems of silence let them thrive. Arthur's case forced a reckoning. Churches reevaluated their youth programs. Schools updated their safety training. Parents began talking about boundaries, consent, and emotional awareness. For the first time, the community understood. Prevention isn't about fear. It's about vigilance wrapped in compassion. It's about asking, listening, and believing, even when the truth shatters comfort. But maybe the real tragedy isn't just what Arthur did. It's how many people like him still walk free, untouched, unnoticed, unchallenged. Because we've built a culture where discomfort is seen as rudeness, and confrontation feels like cruelty. We look away from warning signs because they're inconvenient. We minimize victims because their stories make us uneasy. We forgive predators because they seem nice. And each time we do, the silence grows stronger. Blake once said that after every case, he looks at the evidence room differently. Because behind every file, every photo, there's a moment when someone could have intervened. and didn't. That's the haunting part about cases like this. Not the crime itself, but the ordinary moments that allowed it to unfold. A teacher's ignored concern. A neighbor's half-seen argument. A mother's uneasy intuition dismissed as paranoia. Evil doesn't strike out of nowhere. It accumulates, in every moment of silence that should have been a scream. So what do we take from this? If Maya's story ends only in tragedy, then we've missed the point. Because the purpose of telling these stories, here through the crime lens, isn't to glorify horror, is to understand it, to trace its shape, its psychology, its impact, so that maybe the next time someone recognizes it before it's too late. If you've watched this far, thank you. It means you care about truth, about justice, about the hidden corners of the human experience that too many look away from. You've seen how easily trust can be twisted, how evil hides behind ordinary smiles, but also how resilience and empathy can rebuild what's been broken. That's what we explore here together every week. Because to truly understand crime, we have to understand people. Their fears, their motives, their mistakes, their pain. So if this story moved you, if it made you think, question, or simply feel, then join us. Subscribe to The Crime Lens. Turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a story that matters. Not just for entertainment, but for awareness, for change, for the silent voices that still need to be heard. Because the greatest defense against darkness is to never stop looking for it, and never stop shining light when we find it.